Hi, it's Todd with TLF Works, and today we're going to finish this segmented blank pen that I made for the Lynn Lacey pen swap. My pen swap partner is Adam from Indiana. This is your pen. I hope everybody will stick around.
Today we're making a Penn State Industries Vertex Supreme rollerball kit. It's a two-piece kit with a cap and a body. I currently have the body of the kit on the lathe, and I'm using my Jacob's chuck to drill it out. I'm using a 10.5 millimeter bit that is very dull. And I believe I overheated the blank a little bit while attempting to drill it out because the blank separated at one of the joints between the accents in the blank. You can see here as I remove the blank that it is indeed coming off the lathe in two pieces. So I'll need to sand up the joints on both of those pieces so I can apply some CA glue, get everything aligned, and then glue those pieces back together. Before I continue, I'll do a quick check with the pen tube to ensure that those holes lined up properly. Now I'm over at the sander and I'm removing just a little bit of material on each of the end accent pieces to get the blank down to the proper length so I can glue in the pen tubes. The cap on a Vertex Supreme uses a 12.5 millimeter bit. My 12.5 millimeter bit is nice and sharp, and it went through the blank like butter. Well, somehow or another, I missed out on recording the gluing in of the blanks. I used a 2-part epoxy to glue the tubes in, and now I'm using a little rat tail file to remove any epoxy that got on the insides of the tubes so I can insert my barrel trimmer over here at the sanding station and trim up these blanks right down to the tube. You can see there where I had checked to make sure that I was not sanding too far. I prefer sanding my blanks down to the tubes instead of using the barrel trimmers. I've had bad luck on just a couple of occasions with the barrel trimmers blowing out a blank. Never had a problem on the sander. You do want to make sure that the bed of the sander is at a 90-degree angle to the sanding surface, and that the miter jig is at a 90-degree angle to the sanding surface. I'll be using carbide tools today to do my turning. I bought the tools, except for the handle, from Captain Eddie. He gave me the cutters and the bar. Well, I mean, I paid for them, but I got the cutters and the bar from Captain Eddie, and I turned the handle myself. I've turned four 4 tools, all of which I got from Captain Eddie. Very, very happy with the cutters from him. So you can see here that that I'm turning on a mandrel, and this mandrel is it's a pen saver mandrel. So the mandrel goes through the end into the tailstock, and you're in theory not going to bend your mandrel, or it's not as easy to bend your mandrel using one of these pen saver mandrels. I've had this mandrel for a year or so, and I'm very happy with it. Right here, you'll notice I'm switching to a different cutter tool. This is an R2 square cutter, so it's got a little bit of a curve to it, but it's pretty flat compared to the round cutter I was just using, but it's not completely square. I like using this because if I get any little hills and valleys with that round cutter, this goes through there and it takes those hills off and leaves me with a much more uniformed blank than what I get if I don't use this tool. So once I'm done with this tool, then I typically don't have to do as much sanding to get everything as smooth and even as I like, compared to when I use only the round cutter. When I turn a pen with a single barrel, I prefer to turn it between centers. Sometimes when I turn pens with 2 barrels, I like to use the mandrel, which I did here. Regardless of how I turn it, when it comes to the sanding, I always sand between centers. Also notice that I'm not using the bushings here. I've already got the pen blank turned down to its basic size. And I don't want to use the bushings here because I don't want the sandpaper to inadvertently sand on the bushings and then take little fragments of the bushings and embed them into the wood of the blank. That can cause discoloration and stuff later, and you might not be able to see it when you're sanding, but later when you apply the finish and you've went through the polishing process, you'll see those flakes, those little fragments in your wood. The body of this blank has a little bit of a void in the wood, and I'm going to stabilize this blank with some CA, and then I'm going to take some shavings from this blank and I'm going to force them into this void and then use CA to stabilize the blank. I'm trying to gather up some shavings that are pure black, like the body of this blank, trying to avoid any of the little white and blue specks inside of the shavings. So I'm going to crumble these shavings up in my hand here and then force them into that void and seal it up with this CA. I was very lucky here that this void was very shallow. It didn't go all the way down to the tube or anything, and it took just a little bit of shavings and CA to fill that void. I was also very lucky that it happened in an extremely dark part of this blank. So in the finished product, once the CA finish was put on and I polished it, you can't find this void. It totally disappeared. And I gotta tell you, I was a little scared at the time that I was going to be remaking this blank because of this void, but it turned out wonderful. I stop every once in a while and sand with the grain, with the lathe off. I feel that this is very important to remove those circular scratches from a grit before you continue on to the next level up. I used accelerator here to clean the blank before I started my CA process. My normal CA process is probably 6 to 8 layers of thin CA, followed by 3 or 4 medium CA applications. With this blank, I'm going to use about 15 thins and then about 8 mediums to get the result that I wanted. And part of the reason for that was, if we go back to where that void was, there was just the tiniest little dip in the blank from that void after I finished with the 6th or 7th thin CA. And so I thought, well, I could apply a few more coats of that thin CA and that would disappear, but it didn't. And then I went to the medium and put on a few coats of the medium. And with medium, sometimes if I'm not real careful, I'll get little bitty ridges in the medium. So I put on a few coats of the medium, and then I sanded the medium back to get rid of any ridges. And you'll see here in a minute that when I sand the medium away, what I'm trying to do is get rid of any shiny surfaces. Shiny surfaces represent items that the sandpaper hasn't touched. So my goal is to sand down to where everything becomes dull again. And I couldn't quite do that. I could just see this little dimple where that void had been. So I ended up putting like 3 or 4 more coats of the medium CA on after I did that initial sanding to get rid of those ridges. And then when I was done with the medium at the end, I went ahead and sanded once again to get rid of any ridges before I started my polishing process. Okay, the body of the pen is done. Now it's time to put the CA finish onto the cap. And just like that, we're finishing up with the medium on the cap. Time to polish. So I use these little, I know they're not micro mesh, but people call them the micro mesh polishing pads. There's 9 different grits of it. It starts at 1500 and goes to 12,000, I believe. So I'm going to work my way through these. You'll notice that I've put the blanks back on the mandrel simply because I can polish both blanks at the same time. This is just a time-saving issue. And I use these polishing pads wet, so I'll be dipping them into the water, and between each one I'll wipe the blank off with the little paper towel to try to get rid of any residual grit from the previous pad. After finishing with the polishing pads, I'm going to take a dry paper towel and try to dry. Ooh, that's why we don't wrap things around our fingers and then apply them to lathes. That could easily just suck a finger right in there and ruin your day. So I've broke out the Novus 3 polishing fluid here. I'm going to apply it and rub it in with the lathe turning. And when I'm finished with the buffing with the 3, I'll move down to the Novus 2. And when I'm finished with the Novus 2, I'll put on a little Renaissance wax that somehow or another didn't make the video. So that finishes up the lathe work for this project. The only thing that's left is to assemble this pen. And this pen, you'll have to trust me, it's pretty simple to assemble, and the instructions that Penn State Industries supplies are excellent for assembling the pen. But this is where the battery dies. So here's a couple of pictures of the pen. I hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate your time. I hope you'll subscribe and like my video, and I'll see you later.